Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on politics in Asia and Oceania. In view of the threat posed by North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons program and China's growing thirst for power, Japan wants to upgrade massively, in a clear departure from the security policy, which has so far been exclusively focused on defense. The United States ally wants to be able to eliminate enemy missile positions in the future. This is what the new national security strategy of the government of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida envisages, as reported by the Japanese media on Friday. The defense budget is to be doubled in the next few years. With a revised security doctrine expected on Friday, Japan could disable enemy missile positions before the missiles are fired, regardless of its pacifist post-war constitution. To this end, Japan wants to acquire weapons for counter-strike. According to earlier reports, Japan is also considering purchasing cruise missiles from its protecting power, the United States. Japan increasingly sees China's rearmament, missile tests, and North Korea's nuclear program as a threat. The government sees the fact that the country wants to put itself in a position to disable missile positions on enemy territory in an emergency as an act of self-defense and therefore in line with a pacifist post-war constitution. Japan does not want to become a military power, it said. According to the Japanese news agency Kyodo, the national security strategy, revised for the first time since 2013, should state that a missile defense shield alone is no longer sufficient to deal with the significant reinforcement of the missile arsenals of countries like China and North Korea. China's government has sharply criticized new United States restrictions on Chinese companies' access to American technology as economic harassment. The US is abusing export controls to crack down on Chinese firms and institutions, is what a Commerce Department spokesman said in Beijing on Friday, after 36 Chinese companies were placed on a US blacklist. China would take necessary measures to defend its interests. The US government issued the new sanctions the day before, about 2 months after restricting the supply of state-of-the-art semiconductors and equipment for manufacturing such chips to China. Another 36 Chinese companies and institutions were added to the list, largely denying them access to American products, software, and technology. Among them is one of the leading Chinese chip manufacturers, the Yangtze Memory Technology Corporation, or YMTC. The United States wants to use the barriers to prevent these companies from using American technology to modernize the Chinese military or support human rights violations, according to the US Department of Commerce. After the previous restrictions on the Chinese chip industry, China filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization, the WTO, on Monday to take action against export checks for semiconductor technology. North Korea says it is developing solid fuel technology for its missile program. According to the state news agency KCNA, quoted by South Korean media on Friday, the country, which is largely isolated internationally, has tested a solid fuel engine with high thrust. The test represents the guarantee for the development of another type of strategic weapons system, they said. According to the South Korean news agency Yonhap, experts suspect that the North wants to use the engine test to advance the technologies for the development of a new intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, with solid fuel. Solid fuel missiles can be rolled out of a hangar or tunnel ready for launch and do not require refueling, greatly reducing the time for timely detection of the rockets by satellites. The conflict on the Korean peninsula has become significantly more explosive in recent months. North Korea's military has been firing ballistic missiles at increased frequency and has also intensified its rhetoric against the Seoul government. Some experts suspect that North Korea could soon carry out another nuclear test. UN resolutions prohibit the country from conducting nuclear tests and testing ballistic missiles, which, depending on the design, can be equipped with nuclear warheads. According to its most renowned epidemiologist Zhong Nanshan, China should simply call COVID-19 the corona cold. According to the party-affiliated newspaper Global Times on Friday, the reason given by the government advisor was that the infection after the virus mutations in the past 2 years mainly affected the upper respiratory tract and less than before the lungs. At 0.1%, COVID-19 also has a death rate similar to that of the usual flu now. Nevertheless, efforts must be made to avoid serious cases. After Chinese experts had always warned of the danger of the coronavirus and the consequential damage for infected people as part of the strict zero-COVID strategy that was lifted a week ago, the severity of the disease has been noticeably downplayed since the change of course. According to a new Hong Kong study, however, China is threatened with easing several 100,000 deaths, depending on how quickly booster preparations are used and how strong public and social health measures are taken. A corona wave has been rolling over the most populous country for weeks, which the previous hard zero-COVID measures such as lockdowns, forced quarantine and mass tests were ultimately no longer able to contain. And that is why, according to the World Health Organization, the WHO Emergency Aid Coordinator Mike Ryan, China has also lifted the zero-COVID policy. The intensive spread therefore began long before the reversal and not as a result of the easing. There is no precise picture of the situation as there are no longer any reliable figures, but one thing is clear: people are getting sick in droves, hospitals are experiencing a rush. Authorities are calling for people to cure COVID-19 at home. Fever and cold medicines are sold out in many pharmacies. According to Zhong Nanshan, the particularly easily transmissible Omicron variant BF7 is spreading in the north of Beijing and the surrounding province of Hebei, a subvariant of BA 5.2 which tends to circulate in the south and southwest of the country in metropolitan areas such as Guangzhou and Chongqing. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has apologized for a derogatory remark about an opposition politician and has now settled the dispute with a joint initiative. She had described the leader of the right Liberal ACT party, David Seymour, as an arrogant prick in a parliamentary debate on Tuesday. The statement wasn't meant to be made public, but Ardern didn't realize her microphone was still on. That's what the whole chamber heard, and that's how it was recorded in the official protocol of Parliament. The Prime Minister had already apologized to Seymour. On Thursday, both announced that they would sign a framed printout of the recording and auction it online for a good cause. The money should benefit a foundation that takes care of prostate cancer patients. We managed to laugh about the incident and hatched a plan to raise money for a good cause, said Seymour. The nice thing about this fundraiser is that it appeals to everyone. People who don't like me, people who like me, people who don't like Jacinda, and people who like her. But mostly people who hate prostate cancer, he said. According to a report by the German magazine Spiegel, the number of Iranian asylum seekers in Germany has risen significantly since the beginning of the most recent wave of protests in the country. According to the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees in Nuremberg, 613 Iranians had applied for asylum in September of this year. In October, there were already 892, and in November, 1,039, as the magazine reports, citing the Federal Office. In the same month last year, the number was 381. In the whole of 2021, they had counted 2,693 first-time asylum applications from Iranian nationals. This year, by the end of November, there were already 5,447. The Greens and the Bundestag continue to insist on quick help for critics of the regime. Refugees from Iran must be granted protection and asylum here in Germany, said domestic politician Julian Pahlke. The Bundestag, that's a federal parliament, recently spoke out in favor of supporting the protest movement in Iran. This includes the fact that we still have the opportunity through the German embassy to provide support in the country or to help in individual cases when leaving Iran, they said. The deportation stop must continue to apply, though. China's head of state and party leader Xi Jinping has called for a consensus on better species protection in the world. Speaking via video link at the World Summit on Nature in Montreal, Canada on Friday, Xi Jinping said a healthy ecosystem is essential to the well-being of civilization. We must build a global consensus on protecting biodiversity, Xi Jinping said. It must be worked together for the conclusion of an agreement. Targets and ways to protect biodiversity must be identified, China's president said. Ambitions must be turned into action. Developing countries must also be supported in building up their ability to protect species. Efforts to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss and other global challenges should be coordinated. A just global order for species protection must be maintained, says Xi Jinping. Negotiations at the 15th World Summit on Nature in Canada were entering the home stretch. Most of the participating states are now represented at ministerial level at this meeting, which is scheduled to last until today when I'm filming this. Environment Minister Steffi Lemke from Germany traveled there as well. COP15 was originally supposed to take place in China in 2020, but was then postponed and split up due to the pandemic situation. The first part of the negotiations took place mainly online in Kunming in southwest China last October. China wants to deepen international exchanges on species protection, Xi Jinping said. Through the Green Development Fund as part of its global infrastructure initiative, the new Silk Road, China wants to help developing countries to raise species protection to a new level. In his speech, the president also emphasized China's own efforts, but critics in the second largest economy complain about insufficient nature and environmental protection, which usually has to take a backseat to economic development there. New Zealand wants to ban smoking by law for future generations. The parliament in the capital, Wellington, passed a corresponding legislative package. Thereafter, no tobacco may be sold to people born on or after January 1st, 2009. The new laws are expected to come into force next year. New Zealand's government, led by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, we heard about earlier in this video, wants to make the country smoke-free by 2025. The number of licensed tobacco sales outlets is also to be reduced from 6,000 to 600 by the end of 2023. In addition, the nicotine content in tobacco-containing products should decrease. The measures are among the strictest in the world. Violations can result in fines of up to $150,000, that's the equivalent of around 91,000 euros. There is no good reason to allow the sale of a product that kills half of the people who use it, is what Deputy Health Minister Ayesha Verald said in Parliament. Healthcare will also save billions if diseases such as cancer, heart attacks and strokes, which can also be caused by smoking, no longer have to be treated. According to the Bureau of Statistics, 8% of all New Zealanders smoke every day. In 2021, 9.4% of the population were smoking. After discussions about future penalties for unmarried couples in Indonesia, the government is trying to limit the damage in the tourism industry. Foreign visitors vacationing together in Indonesia need not fear being prosecuted for having sex or living together outside of marriage, said the Southeast Asian island nation's Deputy Justice Minister Edward Hiare on Monday. Because according to a draft law, the police can only investigate if a family member files a complaint, such as the parents of an unmarried person. These provisions would prevent local authorities or law enforcement from pursuing unmarried couples living together, Hiare added. The background to this is legal reforms in the world's most populous Muslim country, which Parliament approved last week. When it comes into force in 2025, the legal situation for unmarried couples will be drastically tightened. Sex outside of marriage will be prohibited and punished with up to 1 year in prison. Unmarried people will no longer be allowed to live together. Human rights activists criticized the planned law as a deep encroachment on the rights and the freedoms of citizens. On Sunday, Bali's governor, Wayne Costa, underscored that the provincial government will continue to keep data on the marital status of visitors confidential, and this will not be requested upon arrival at accommodations on the popular holiday island. After more than 2 loss-making years of the pandemic, Indonesia's tourism industry, especially with Bali as the top destination, is hoping for many holidaymakers for the upcoming Christmas and New Year period. The European Union has failed to persuade the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, to unanimously condemn Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The final declaration on the first major summit meeting of the two organizations in Brussels on Wednesday merely stated that most of the participating states condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. Diplomats cited the position of Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand as the reason. These 3 countries also abstained from the last major vote on a UN resolution critical of Russia's war. At the summit, the EU made it clear in principle that, despite differences, it wants to work more closely with the countries in Southeast Asia, also in order to limit the influence of China and Russia. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced investments of 10 billion euros. The money is intended to strengthen the economy and independence of countries like Indonesia and Thailand, create jobs, and promote the fight against climate change. And EU Foreign Policy Chief and Vice President Josep Borrell said a battle of bits was taking place on the geopolitical stage. If you don't want to be overtaken by other players, you have to get more involved and invest more. The Asian region has a vibrant economy and will grow and grow in the coming years. Leaders from Vietnam and the International Partner Group, which includes the European Union, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the United States, Italy, Canada, Japan, Norway, and Denmark, announced an ambitious partnership for a just energy transition on December 14th. It's called JETP. JETP will mobilize an initial $15.5 billion in public and private funding over the next 3 to 5 years to support Vietnam's green transition. The partnership will help Vietnam meet its ambitious net zero 2050 goal of accelerating its greenhouse gas emissions peak and making the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And this concludes today's magazine on Asian and Oceanic politics, but tomorrow there will be another magazine about another part of the world. It will be Africa and Arabia. So I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.